experience in the NFL. Also, Penn State alumni, Miami Dolphins Walk of Fame, and was also in 1998 the receptions leader in the NFL. I'm excited about this one because we got a lot of shakeups in the AFC and the NFL, and I don't even know who to trust in this conference outside of the NFC. So to explain all about that, former NFL wide receiver OJ McDuffie joins us here on the program. So my thing was this, OJ, is like, walking into the season, I would have thought that after the draft, after free agency, that the AFC, because the NFC, what I've talked about that is the NFC has had a history of being the most roster constructed conference that as long as they have the playmakers, the offensive line, defensive unit, and if you're the Dallas Cowboys, for example, and you got Dak Prescott, that's a good enough quarterback that you have. The AFC, which is highly talented for quarterbacks, every single one of them has an issue that's different from each other, but it's the kind of issue you cannot end up ignoring, especially as you get into the tail end of the season. When you look at this with the AFC, and we'll talk a bit about Miami after, but I just feel like this conference right now is so wide open than I think it's ever been in the last few years.
Yeah, man, it's been great. It really has been great, man. And, you look at some of the teams that are in the conference and, some surprises. You don't see the Ravens up top. You don't see the Bills up top. You don't see a lot of teams that everybody expected not only to be up top, but to be in the Super Bowl that are not getting the opportunities right now because of some of these other teams, the Colts, the Patriots. Those teams are really out there outshining a lot of guys. And I love the fact that the NFL is wide open, man. It's so much fun this year because it truly is. And I know it's cliche, but it truly is any given Sunday. And you've seen that over and over and over again, man. And, we'll talk about my Dolphins a little bit, I'm sure. But, man, just seeing teams fighting and beating teams that they're not supposed to beat. But I always say this, though. How you say a team's not supposed to beat a certain team when everybody's getting paid pretty much the same amount of money? They all get, all NFL pros, they better show up every single Sunday, Monday, Thursday, whatever. NFL is every single day of the week nowadays. But I'm just pumped that you get to go out there and watch a game and not already know the outcome like you can in college football.
It's interesting. So I started the program off with this because talking about what I watched on Sunday night between the Broncos and the Commanders. First of all, I love this Denver defense. I have no problems with them with how they've been getting sacks and takeaways and pass defenses. But what I do have a problem with, OJ, is that I'm not trying to say that Bo Nix is not a franchise quarterback, but I watched the box score even after the way that the final score gave us. This box score doesn't make sense to me because they're scoring in smaller increments. And the most important quarter of every football game, even in your experience, you cannot have a donut in the fourth quarter. That's one of the things that's unacceptable. So to me, listen, they're 10-2. They deserve to be 10-2. They fought hard. They worked this hard. But I also believe in this, is that we have watched in recent histories where teams that have played this way, what I don't want to happen, and I live in Denver, is that Denver fans are that bought in, and there's one team in the AFC, it could be any of them, that could completely collapse and dismantle the way that this season has given them if they're in the playoffs, and either you're after the bye, like you got to expect everything, but you also have to be an offense willing to score when it all matters. What did you see from there? Because to me, listen, if I'm Denver, I'm patting Nick Benito's back all week because that would have been one of the ugliest losses Denver would have had.
Yeah, you know what? Everybody has those, though. Everybody has those ugly losses, and the true teams are the ones that are confronted with those situations and find a way to win. I mean, that's the bottom line right there. And you got to say this, though, too, though. Denver's had some of those crazy forces as well.
Yeah.
They had a rough one recently, but they've had some really crazy fourth quarters, and that's all, like you talk about, that matters. You know, two things that matter in football is what you do in December, what you do in the fourth quarter. Fourth quarter is so important in football that it doesn't, you could have a quarterback and say Bo Nix that could maybe, I'm just being hypothetical, throw an interception or two in the first or second half, first half, but then the third, fourth quarter goes down there and finds a way for his team to win. And that's really all that matters, man. Getting away with a win, you don't need style points in the NFL. You need wins in the NFL, and that's all that matters. Like, you look at some of the things that are going on in college football, like I live down here in Miami. You're in Denver, I'm in Miami. University of Miami, they're struggling because of the couple losses they had.
Yep.
And some of the wins they had that, weren't big enough for certain people that are, putting people in these positions to be in the college football playoffs. But it doesn't matter in the NFL. NFL, all that matters is find a way to win. Get on a plane if you're on the road, or go home and sleep in your bed if you live at home, and just have that dub next to that game, man. So it's tough, man. But I love the parity. It's absolutely amazing, the parity. And every single Sunday, I'm excited to see which team's going to shock the world. And it's not really shocking the world because they should win games because they're NFL players. But it's always fun to see the people that think that some teams have no chance and they go out there and they beat people.
So tonight's game's going to be interesting. New England and New York. Now, of course, there's been history with both these franchises only because, you think about the Super Bowl matchups with both of them, right, and how it left a bad taste in Brady's mouth twice. But right. However, my biggest thing with New England is I knew the minute that Mike Vrabel came into the building, this culture was changing. I didn't think it was going to change like this, where it's a complete 360 turn. You got all of the Bill Belichick guys and all that stuff out of the building. Drake May looks confident, but I did say there was going to be a point, even with the rest of these AFC teams, where you're going to face against a team that can outmatch you physically, whether it's the defensive front, or it could be the secondary that's shutting you down and a lot of the weapons that you're trying to utilize and spread. New England's banged up as of right now. I don't know if this will be a win for them. If they do, that just tells you how tough Mike Vrabel really is. But I do feel like this was a test about the physicality portion and how important the coaching aspect will be, especially when we come into January, February football.
Physical football is all that matters, man. It really is. No matter what, you've got to win up front. And then also on the back end, especially on the defensive side, you got to be as physical as possible, man. Vrabel is going to bring a different style of football to New England that they really had. And people don't even talk about it that much about New England. When Tom Brady was doing what he was doing, that defense was better than people even want to talk about because everything was about Tom Brady. But that defense is always a top 10 defense. And that's what happens when you're winning Super Bowls. And thank you for referencing that, the Giants versus New England, because they preserved our, perfect season down here in Miami. The only thing we hold our hats to, and we hang our hats on that still. We appreciate that love right there. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Giants, for that. But physicality is what it's all about. And if you win if you win up front, you're going to win most games. You really are. And Mike Vrabel, who I feel got a bad deal out in Tennessee, man. What he was doing for the Titans was special. What he did with Ryan Tannehill's quarterback to get as far as they did a couple times, that's special. So he was you knew he was going to bring that. You knew he was going to bring the New England way back to Foxborough, and he's done that so far. And I knew that Drake May at some point was going to shine. It's so crazy to us down here in Miami that we got rid of Tom Brady. He retired or went to Tampa, and then we had to deal with Josh Allen. Now we got to deal with Josh Allen and Drake May. So we are struggling in the AFC East. We know what the Jets are dealing with quarterback position, but at the same time, man, it's been tough, man. So that physical style of football, it translates, man. It travels. It does everything you want to do this time of year, December into January, and for some of these teams, hopefully into February where you're playing a Super Bowl.
So this is an interesting question before we hop into Miami talk is, you had the pleasure of playing in two different aspects. So number one was in college, you played in a more physical in the trenches type of program in Penn State. Now, in Miami, you had the pleasure of playing alongside arguably one of the most talented quarterbacks that you've ever seen in your life in Dan Marino. Now, I look at the Chicago Bears.
Yeah.
Number one, it's not pretty. We know Caleb Williams is talented. He's got a great fastball, but oftentimes he can lose control of his fastballs and not think about the simple stuff like the on-script stuff. Like the ad-libs, we know that he can do that as long as either Rome Odunze or even the rookie Colston Loveland, either of those weapons are open, and they're open about 20-plus yards downfield. Ben Johnson, in my opinion, has really reshaped up this culture that has stuck into the 1950s television of Monsters of the Midway defense. They've never had a more potent, competitive, and yet creative offense. And I think what we're seeing right now is the run game is efficient. The offensive line has really stepped up in many ways, especially in the interior sides where you need to create holes for the run game and defend your franchise quarterback. When you think about this, it's not pretty right now, OJ, but eventually I think the more we work into this, it's like a certain project that we're in a beta test right now that hasn't even finished its final form. But when it does, this has got to be scary for us to even consider that maybe the Bears actually can shock the entirety of the NFC. Can it not?
Yeah. I mean, Ben Johnson's just getting started, man. I think he's just getting started. And you start, most teams, if you want to be successful, you start on the defense side of football. And you hit the nail on the head right there. Like, it's like if you've got a solid defense that's going out there and making plays and, creating chaos, that's always going to be an effective way of winning football games. And then you got an offense that doesn't mess it up. Just don't mess it up as an offense. That's always critical, man. And I love the fact that, Caleb Williams has found a guy in Ben Johnson that's catering to what he does well. Caleb Williams, like you talked about when he was at USC, was a great quarterback off script. In the NFL, you really have to be on script most of the time. Sometimes it does help that you can be and it extends drives and things like that. But this team is shocking the world, man. We talked about it a little bit earlier, man. Coming into the season, it looked like Detroit was going to be odds-on favorite easily to win the NFC North. I mean, it looked like, they're going to get back into it. They're going to do what they're doing. You look at Green Bay, who's doing a great job, with Love and those guys. I don't know what Minnesota's thinking about right now, but, they've got some questions that they've got to answer. But at the same time, though, you look at the Bears and, nobody thought the Bears would be where they're at right now. And I just, that's what I'm saying. One of the things we're talking about is like, I love football right now and the way that some of these guys and some of these teams that nobody gave a chance have a chance. Some with new head coaches, some with older head coaches. Talk about Vrabel in New England, but you're talking about Ben Johnson, what he's doing in Chicago. And I think that's special about what football can be about in the NFL. You get in there, you've got a lot of guys that you had there on the roster already, and then you got some new guys you have to bring in. But it seems to me that they found the right fits for what they're looking and what they're expecting, and they've been fun to watch, man. It's gonna be interesting to see how far they go, considering that they've got a lot of newbies that are trying to make this run, in the position they're in. But it's tough. It's tough being on the top, and it's tough to, for those guys that have to defend this every single week because everybody's gonna give them their best.
It's interesting because, I feel like we're getting the return of the gritty football, like the ones that every single coach is showing you what is most important and what they can work with, but they also have the ability to have the availability in the most important pieces where you need them to be available. And I think that's what's also been testing a lot of teams. All right. So Miami, I actually had one of the really good guys from Dolphins Wire who was up and on here after we talked about the Chris Grier firing. And to me, it was much needed time. I felt like some of the moves were somewhat wonky. Like they hit on some picks, but there were some of it that I felt like, man, they could have addressed it. Like, to me personally, I made the comment of, if you could go back in time, and when you're thinking about Tua, you're going to pay him that X amount of money, and then what his availability is going to cost will be the outcome. But I felt like if they would have went and got Joe Milton it's good to have an insurance policy backup because you never know when you're going to use that. So with Chris Grier gone, what I've noticed is Mike McDaniel has turned up the heat a bit.
Yeah.
And now the question becomes, I think what he's trying to prove, and I think everybody in Miami loves him. I mean, you hear it all the time, like all around in Miami. They don't want McDaniel to honestly be gone. There's something there. But I do feel that in a competitive standpoint, there's going to be spoilers. They're going to want to play. But I also do know that you also got to think about when you're in the draft spots, what positions you really want to be able to address, free agency, who you're going to let go, restructure, and then bring in new pieces that add to the culture. If you get the right GM, that is going to fit into the identity that McDaniel's putting together. So I feel like with this, it's going to take some time, but in a stretch like this, what should you expect Miami should do with the 5 remaining games up on here? That's going to be the most important, because you don't want to be the team that like wins out and they fired the GM and now they've lowered their positions on the draft board. And you also don't want to be the team that like, well, if you lose them out, now what are the chances about Mike McDaniel's future? You want to be kind of comfortably up and in the middle, a happy medium, to where now you can be in the best position and get the best available draftee that's going to be a changer, that's going to reboot this culture that they've been trying to build.
Yeah, the crazy thing about all that is that, even when you fire your GM, I mean, the players are already in the house. They're already in the house. So what do you do? You're not, you fire him like right up next to the trade deadline, and Champ Kelly, he's doing, obviously he's going to be the guy that we're talking about right now being the next GM for us. But what do you do with the guys that are already in house? And that's been the difference. I'm like thinking like, you can fire Chris Grier all you want, but what are you going to, the players are there already. So it's up to the coaches at that point to make those players play and get the most out of them. Now, we know there are some times where there are influences from GMs to coaches to, make sure this guy or that guy plays, but it's on the coaches to go out there and get them to play, because, every GM wants to see their draft picks. They want to make sure they're free agents. All those guys work out when it comes to that, when it comes to the, next level. So for us, it's really interesting that, Mike has finally figured out that we have to figure out a way to move the football, and it's not through the air with Tua Tagovailoa.
Yeah.
It's not. It really isn't, man. Tua had one of the worst games I've ever seen him have this past Sunday, and we still found a way to win a football game. This is a really bad Saints team. Let's put that there too. It was a bad Saints team, but at the same time, we just talked about it. It's any given Sunday, and this Saints team gave us all that we could handle when it shouldn't have been like that. So with that being said, you got, Mike McDaniel has found a way to figure out a way to separate himself away from what Chris Grier was doing and how he wanted things to be, and it's working out for us so far. Look, we've got one of the best running backs in the game right now in Devon Achane. I mean, we really do. And when we commit to the run, when we commit to having a 13 personnel out there or a 12 personnel out there, when you can actually run the ball most of the time, even pass it on occasion, it's worked out for us. And since Chris has been gone, Mike has actually figured out that, look, maybe Tua is not the way to go in terms of trying to win football games. We got to make sure Tua doesn't lose football games for us. And I think that's an important thing. A lot of these franchises, they have franchise guys. You talk about Drake May, it's a franchise quarterback. He'll win football games for you. But in our position here, I think that no matter what, Mike has got to figure out that you have to not let Tua ruin the game. And on top of that, we both know this. Football. Football in and out. Defense and run game, it travels. Doesn't matter what the weather is. Doesn't matter what anything is. lean on it. And we decided to lean on that. And I think that's been very important and a very big transition from Mike. Even, I know we had Tyreek and Waddle, and of course you want to throw the ball around the yard. But hell, man, football's about beating people up in the trenches like we talked about earlier, and then finding a way. If you get guys that are creep up, bring somebody in the box, find a way to get behind them a little bit.
I feel like, though, they've got plenty of speed. I don't think that's really ever their problem, but I feel like the trenches, like you said. And then I also do feel like size is also another thing that they should consider, because isn't it always good when you got a 6'5" receiver who's got the length, who could go one-on-one? And if you got the quarterback, right, that can obviously throw outside the hashes and right there on the outside sidelines, that guy's going to be guaranteed to go up and get it. That becomes a big difference maker, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it, man. We got a lot of Smurfs. We do have a lot of Smurfs, man. And they can run. Boy, can they run. Can we find a big Smurf that can run? And then, like you're talking about, man, can we turn a 50-50 ball on the outside with a big receiver to an 80-20 ball? And I think that's important. And Tua has to trust it. We saw Jalen Hurts trust that finally with A.J. Brown, this past week. Just throw it up, man. He's got a one-on-one situation, give him an opportunity, and you go out there and make plays, man. And that's part of the league. Nobody, unless there's a coverage bust, nobody's going to be wide open in this league. Nobody's going to be wide open in this league. So you got to have guys that are going to be able to go out there and make those plays and make your quarterback look as good as possible in those situations, man. So, yeah, there are guys out there now. Look, there are guys out there now that'll be coming out that might be projects or whatever. But if they've got speed and size, they'll be advantageous for us to go out and get some of these guys. The problem with us, though, man, is that our offense is so complicated. We've got some really good receivers that have come through it that, we've got 22-word plays. Like, I mean, what the hell's going on, man? I get it. Like a guy like myself and some of the guys I played with, they'd be able to handle this. But some of these guys, when you got flashcards, you got Beyonce and you got, the Miami Lakes, all these things I don't know what the hell's going on in college sometimes, but in the NFL, it's a whole different world, man. And so if you got guys that may have that talent, that size, that speed, but can't pick up an offense, man, because the system changes week after week after week, it's tough on them. So we got to find guys that are both fast, big, and also intelligent enough to be and professional enough to handle what the curriculum is.
It's funny because, I've said this narrative about Miami, and just being fair and clear is that they remind me so much of the Lamborghini of the NFL. It's just, can I get some traction on them tires? Can I make it durable to be, capable in every single weather, like climate? And then that way, then this team can have a little bit more of that aggression and that physicality where I'm like, man, them boys in South Beach, they could play some ball. A final question for you. So your alma mater, Penn State. Now, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later on, but lots of changes within college football realm, mostly in the SEC. Now, a lot of times now, the NIL and the transfer portal certainly has affected a lot of just the expectations of coaching in college football. It's very tribal. There's a lot of, you got to be able to have a happy medium with those boosters and the fan bases that are in those college programs. Now, Penn State, and you know this to be true, Penn State has always been in the trenches, physical. They've got a great defensive, schematic. And it's just offensively, they can run the football well, but it's that over-the-top piece that, a talented quarterback, a talented wide receiver, just those things to be able to take Penn State and put in national champion aspirations with them.
Right.
But unfortunately, with the way the season has gone down, it's been a disappointment. Now, James Franklin goes to Virginia Tech. When you think about the coaching scheme up here from Penn State now, they have to really think about the guy they got to hire. But sometimes it's not that simple for some, because you may have one scheme that has worked for so long and have another scheme that you're trying to incorporate. It's the same thing we talked about with Chicago. They've always known to be physical, but then when you start to bring in the smart X's and O's mastermind to get offense rolling, that may take a bit of time, but then it's also tapping into the recruitment, tapping into the transfer portal, and then putting all the pieces together so that, because the Big Ten is physical, But if you are that team that kind of has a little of some SEC type of mentality there, that might shock up your Ohio States, your Michigans, all of those. So what's it got to take for Penn State to eventually reach up to this level? Because now the SEC's got a lot of different coaches now. The carousel started to move around. I think the ACC's also got some competition, but for them themselves to be able to get in and hope those national championship aspirations are not far long gone.
Yeah, great question, man. I think, this year was supposed to be the year. It really was, man. James Franklin, had the opportunity to, try to replicate what Michigan did a couple of years ago, what Ohio State did last year. We had a lot of guys come back for the final year because of the fact that they got to the Final Four last year in the college football playoffs. And, you got Drew Aller, who's, he was probably top 3 when it comes to the betting odds to win the Heisman Trophy, and it didn't work out. Jim Knowles, the defense coordinator, and a solid defense that was coming back with a lot of guys, has been not as advertised. And so a lot of things did not work out for this football team. So getting back to doing things the way we always did them back in the day with Penn State, the physical part of football, running the football, playing solid defense, it was missing. And it was a miss early in the season. And we were all worried as alumni, originally, no knock on the FIUs, the Nevadas, those teams like or Villanovas, no knock on them, but those are tougher games than we should have had, before we got into the Big Ten schedule. And so we were worried early about what was going on. Then you run into, an Oregon team. That's a good team. They're a great addition to the Big Ten. And all the other things. The Northwestern loss was humongous. That was terrible. Then so of course James Franklin eventually gets fired. It's tough right now in the Big Ten when you have such high expectations. We as alumni love Terry Smith and what he's been able to do. Look, he came into a tough situation. You lose James Franklin as the head man. You lose Drew Aller, the guy we talked about is going to be a top 3 draft pick. A Heisman guy. And then you go to Iowa at night. You go to Ohio State, number 1. You got number 2 Indiana at home. Those are tough. That's a tough situation, man. And so now we're reeling. We really are reeling, man, right now. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens moving forward. I understand there's big interest in the BYU coach coming to Penn State. They've already struck out on a lot of guys. Once Franklin got fired, you saw these other universities re-upping their guys, extending their guys, giving long because they knew that we were on the prowl for somebody else. And now, I think no matter what, it's always going to be about, what's best for Penn State. What's best for Penn State right now is Terry Smith. Terry Smith, people don't even realize, is the guy that's brought in 2/3 of our big-time roster, the 4- and 5-star recruits. Terry Smith is the guy that's brought them in there, so they're worried about recruiting. Recruiting is going to go. Yeah, it's going to change because nobody knows what's going on with the program. So recruiting is going to be a tough deal, but they know that Coach Smith is going to be around. That'd be big for our football program moving forward. Now, we've got high expectations. You have to have high expectations. When you're playing in the Big Ten, when you see what Ohio State and Michigan have done the past few years, it's their high expectation. So big splash names, they're all going too. They're going. They've already made the decision where they're going to go. They didn't want to come into Penn State because I think there's a lot of fans, alumni, former players that are looking elsewhere. So they're going already too. So what do? That's the big question, man. We don't know. We're right now sitting here, I talked to Coach Smith today, and Coach Smith doesn't know what's going to happen either. And I know that he's pumped for the opportunity possibly to be the next guy. And so we've got to figure out a way to get back to Penn State way of doing things. But look at this, though. Penn State's been okay for a long time. And that's unfortunate for us. We've been just okay. We haven't won a national championship since 1986. We haven't gone undefeated since Kajana Carter and Kerry Collins and and Kyle Brady and Bobby Ingram, all of them did all what they were doing. We went to the Final Four last year. But other than that, though, we've just been okay. What do we have? We have to figure out a way to get to being better than okay. And that's been the toughest thing for us so far.
Absolutely. I mean, being middle of the pack, oftentimes, it's like, I think of it this way. You hate to be somewhat of the Steelers of the Big Ten, because it's like you don't want to be fine with just okay. We want to be over the top in a lot of these positions. That's going to get us there. So the aspirations come into fruition, So appreciate you, OJ, man. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. We had a lot of stuff that was going on last week, and absolutely great to piggyback off of last week and to have great interviewers like yourself as well. And you've got your podcast, of course, representing for the team you played for in the Fish Tank. Lots of great stuff, lots of great content, guys. Check it out, the Fish Tank podcast. It's a lot of fun for all the diehard Miami fans. But Penn State alumni, Fiesta Bowl MVP, receptions leader, 98 with the Dolphins, and also part of the Dolphins Walk of Fame. Appreciate you for coming on by, man. Enjoy the holiday season with you and your family, man. And we're going to see, because I know everybody's marking up their New Year's resolutions. I'm sure Penn State's resolution is do not let the aspirations die.
Right.
And for Miami, just get us into a position where we can get the guys that will turn this puppy up and bring in some more brute physicality at some point.
Yes, sir, man. Bottom line, hit him in the mouth, man. It's bottom line. Football, hit him in the mouth.
Exactly. Appreciate you, man. Take care of yourself, and we will see you soon.
You got it, boss. Thank you.
Absolutely. Loved it. It's so funny when you think about